Welcome to the Cabral Concept, where board-certified naturopath and integrative health practitioner Dr. Stephen Cabral shares how he was diagnosed at the age of 17 with a life-altering illness and given no hope for recovery. It was only after studying and traveling all over the world did he discover how to combine ancient Ayurvedic healing practices with state-of-the-art naturopathic and functional medicine to fully rebalance the body and re-energize it with life. It's time to discover how to get well, lose weight, and finally feel alive again. And now, here's your host, Dr. Stephen Cabral.
Welcome back, everyone. Episode 2364 today of the Cabral Concept. Thanks so much for joining me. I'm going to share with you the main reason why people are experiencing low energy and poor sleep. Believe it or not, it has to do with three specific organs in your body, two tiny ones inside of the brain, and another one that sits just above the kidneys. So if the body is working exactly as it should, you should start to get tired when it begins to get dark out. That means somewhere during the summertime, 8, 9 o'clock at night, you start to wind the body down. And then in the morning, somewhere around 6 a.m. or so, you start to wind the body up. If the body is working properly, that is exactly how it should work. Now, there's a lot of people that will tell you differently, but that is absolutely not the truth. Now, again, you could cherry pick studies to find people that are so called night owls, but it's simply not true. And we know it's not true because the human body is not supposed to work in that way. We know it's not supposed to work in that way because we are not nocturnal beings. We cannot see in the dark. We cannot see in the dark like a cat or a true carnivore-based predator, something that hunts basically at night. We would be easy prey outside in the wild to any of the animals that can see very well in the dark. Yeah, can we see in the dark? Sure, but certainly not like a nocturnal-based being. So we do really well with higher levels of cortisol in the morning. That's a particular stress hormone. I'll be talking about that here today. But that hormone should not be on at night. If it's on at night, we know that there could be a higher prevalence then of dementia, Alzheimer's, type 2 diabetes, higher levels of stroke or high blood pressure, higher levels of cholesterol, cardiovascular-based disease, and many other inflammatory conditions, as well as a poor immune function. We know all of these things. That's actually been studied well in depth for the past few decades, like 3+ decades. And what I want to share with you today is I brought back my model here, Walter. If you've been a part of the podcast for some time, if you've been a part of the Integrative Health Practitioner Institute, learning how to become a health coach, you'll have seen my friend here for quite some time. If you're not watching this on video, basically I have an anatomical model about 2 feet or so high, and I'm really excited to see I have a lot of the other IHPs teaching on that as well. The reason why it's nice to be able to use this particular model is you can actually take a peek inside of the human body. So in conventional medicine, we've been taught forever to simply look at outward-based symptoms. Well, outward-based symptoms always have an inward-based root cause. And so when you're talking about energy and when you're talking about poor sleep, for sure, we're talking about specific hormones, but not the hormones that you think about like estrogen or progesterone or testosterone or even thyroid. We're not talking about those specific hormones, although they do matter. What we're talking about today is the signal that your brain actually sends from your hypothalamus to your pituitary gland, which are both inside of the brain. They're very, very small. I'm pointing them right here if you're watching this on video. And then they move down the body, and I'll remove the lungs here of my buddy Walter. I'll remove the hearts. I'll remove the liver and the stomach. Okay, and then we're going to remove the intestines here. So he is completely now open wide. And what you see back here is actually the 2 kidneys. So again, if you're not watching this video, it's okay. But we've got 2 kidney bean shaped organs, and those are the kidneys. All right, so right above them, we have 2 walnut-based shaped, basically pyramids, and those are the adrenals. All right, so every morning and all throughout the day, of course, your brain is sending signals to your adrenal glands, which sit right on top of those kidneys. And if it's working properly, and I'll tell you in a moment how mine were not working properly, you're going to get a signal first called corticotropin releasing hormone, CRH. And again, if you've studied at IHP and you've learned how to kind of look at these labs and read these labs, you'll know about this. But essentially, one part of your brain, part of the peripheral nervous system, is getting signals saying, oh, it's starting to get light out, right? Like it's starting to be that time of the day where we should be waking. So the body does what? Well, it starts to produce cortisol. Now, it'll produce it even if there is no light, but not to the same degree. All right, so I'm going to get back to light in just a moment and why it's important to not always call blue light the bad guy or bad, type of light, all right? It's very, very important, but we'll talk about that in just a moment. So now the hypothalamus, it basically just sends a signal right next door to the pituitary gland. I mean, they're right next to each other. But what the pituitary gland does, it has a very different job. Its job is to receive the corticotropin-releasing hormone and to produce its own hormone called adrenocorticotropic hormone. That's called ACTH. And then where does that go? Well, that signals these adrenals now to produce cortisol and essentially norepinephrine, but we won't chat about that here today. Norepinephrine kind of gives you that fight or flight. Cortisol allows the glucose and everything to be brought into the bloodstream to give you energy, should it be needed for stress. So, and the body, by the way, needs these things all day long. It's just varying degrees of stress. Like you're not always in wild fight or flight, but to degrees, with just literally getting a work phone call or giving a meeting or being stuck in traffic or just dropping down in blood sugar, your body has to produce cortisol. That's how we live, right? That's how the body functions. And it's a beautiful feedback loop. Essentially, it works on a positive and negative feedback loop. All right, so you start to drop into lower blood sugar in the morning, potentially, not everybody, but some people might. Well, so what does your body do? Well, it sends a positive feedback loop to turn on CRH and then ACTH to tell the adrenals to produce those fight or flight hormones and neurotransmitters such as norepinephrine and cortisol. Okay, so that works great. And then when your body has enough of it, what does it do? It sends a negative feedback loop to shut that off. And that's when the body's working well, the thyroid does that, the adrenals do that, the ovaries do that, the testes do that. That's how the body works. And it all starts in the brain, right? So what turns this on in the morning? It actually is blue light. So blue and some red. So why does that matter? Because believe it or not, if you're not waking up with light in the morning or exposing yourself to light, and I've actually, many years ago, I did a product review, and I'll be doing a lot more product reviews in the future as well, called a light box. It's actually, you know what? I don't have mine right here on my desk. I wish I did. Because in the wintertime, if I am in Maine at that particular time, it's right there. I'm going to grab it on my desk, and I'm going to show you right now. So you can see, if you're watching this again on video, if not, all it looks like is a white sheet of paper. It's only about 1/4 of an inch thick, and I can set this on my desk or right at home, and on a dreary day, it will actually do what? Well, it's about 10,000 lux, and you can brighten it or you can dampen it, and it will actually provide some of that blue light during the day. Now, you might say, but I heard blue light was bad for me, and you are correct, but again, everything is nuanced. It's bad for you if it's later in the day. Why? Well, we'll get to that in just a moment. So what I can do is, since this isn't a nutritional supplement or it's not a anything that can cure, diagnose, or treat disease, right, for the FDA, we can link up something like this today. But honestly, you can just go to stevencabral.com/resources. All my favorite products and companies that I love that I think are doing great work, that's help with. So it's very helpful with seasonal affective disorder, low energy, low mood. You put that in the morning, you put it on in the morning for about 20, 30 minutes as you're getting ready or having breakfast, put it right in your bathroom or at your kitchen table. And it's a great way to get those levels back up, especially if you're someone that lives in New England and, for all of November, December, January, February, March, April, it's pretty dreary out. Like it's gray a lot of the time. So that's very, very helpful. And what does it do? Well, it doesn't overproduce. It just produces your body to get the right stimulus to produce then the right amount of cortisol and norepinephrine. And then again, dopamine and other things during the day. Okay, so here's the interesting thing. When I was 17 years old, I had Addison's disease. So Addison's disease is the inability to produce cortisol. And the way that they found this out is that it took 2 years to diagnose it. Because again, when you look healthy for the most part and your blood work looks healthy for the most part and you go into your PCP and they run typical blood work, then they don't find anything, right? And you just keep saying like, I'm exhausted. I have brain fog. I can no longer study. I can't, play sports. I have no energy. I have no ATP. And I've just have wild, fluctuations in blood sugar. And they're like, well, everything looks normal on our side, right? Because they didn't run some of these more advanced tests. But anyway, you can even run these on your own with something called the stress, mood, and metabolism. And although we're not diagnosing disease, what we are looking for is cortisol production, high or low, because it's bad in either one direction. So for me, they gave me literally, they did a test called an ACTH stim test that nobody needs to do this unless you find out you're already low on cortisol. And when they gave me the stimulus to tell my adrenals to produce cortisol, they didn't. And so that's how I was diagnosed with primary Addison's disease. Now, I'm happy to say that I overcame that and autoimmune issues and type 2 diabetes. The type 2 diabetes was actually a result of the Addison's disease. Why? Because my blood sugar would drop very low, and then all of a sudden, what would happen? Well, my body would be trying to kick on cortisol, which is a glucocorticoid, to raise glucose levels, and it couldn't. Well, eventually, my heart rate would start speeding up. I would start sweating, and then eventually, we'd kick on just enough to be able to then produce more glucose. The problem is that insulin and everything else was dysregulated, so I couldn't then remove it as well from my bloodstream when there was too much. Anyway, so that's why sometimes I believe that we're treating a lot of the treating like the top of the iceberg instead of the bottom. The bottom of the iceberg was stress imbalance, Addison's disease, and a lot of gut dysfunction. And so when I worked on those things, the autoimmune diseases that I had, the type 2 diabetes, the POTS, the mastocytosis, the Addison's disease, insomnia, and much more all went away. So I'm kind of teaching you about the insomnia and the energy here today. Most people don't have Addison's disease. Very, very small people do, but they have there's levels of this, right? You don't have to be diagnosed with Addison's disease to not have energy. And so what I'm explaining is the actual energy part during the day. And so we have to look at that in terms of chronic stress and then our body's ability to respond to just normal lifestyle, right? So we get our bodies moving during the day. That's the cortisol earlier in the morning. And then after that, as the day starts to progress, and again, I write about this in The Rain Barrel Effect. That book, by the way, is now free. If you don't have a copy of The Rain Barrel Effect, I can't recommend picking up a copy enough. I pay for the printing of that book. It's somewhere around $7 or $8, and we just ask that you pay for the shipping. I pay for the printing. You can pay for the shipping, or if you want to pay for the whole thing, you're welcome to right on Amazon. But just my website, StephenCabral.com. We literally are giving the book away for free because it teaches all of these concepts, and I believe what is a very approachable format so that you can learn how your body became imbalanced and how to get well again, not just in terms of energy, but in terms of anything that could go wrong with the body. It took me a long time to learn this, and I'm just trying to put it into an easy format for people. So what I'd also like to share as well before we just move on the show is you can search any topic you want, anything to do with thyroid or skin or sleep or hormones or mood or products or anything at stephencabral.com/podcast. I'm making that an archive. It's 2,363 shows now. There's a search box. Search for anything you want. All of the shows are free. We just hope that you'll write a review for the show, that you'll share it with others, and that's about it. So honestly, we're just trying to share this information. I've been very fortunate to find out a lot of these underlying root causes, and I simply want to share them with others. So that is that. All right, so let's move on. As cortisol peaks between 6 and 8 o'clock in the morning, if it does not peak during that time, then your body is considered dysfunctional. You can prove it for yourself on something called the stress, mood, and metabolism test. Those you can find with your local naturopathic doctor or integrative health practitioner level 2, or right at stephencabral.com/labs. Always your choice. Okay, so you peak out in the morning. If you don't, then you're not going to have good energy. So we see people all the time, and they're okay, like they're like a 6 for their cortisol in the morning. That's not bad. It's not bad at all. But if it was an 8, you'd have way more energy. And that's not an overproduction of cortisol, right? An overproduction of cortisol in the morning would be like a 10 plus. So we look at those numbers and we say, oh, well, yeah, you're a 6, but that's not optimal. So that's also why you might have more brain fog, slower to get going, low ambition, low drive, low mood in the morning, okay? But then we look at because we do one at noon as well, right before lunch. You're like, oh, it's pretty good there. How do you feel at noon? Like, oh, I usually feel pretty good. All right, afternoon seems to dip a little bit, but not too bad. How do you feel? Like, yeah, I feel like I dipped a little bit, but not too bad. And then the evening, someone's might be high. And if it's high cortisol at night, that is an issue. All right, I'm going to share with you why. It's an issue because you could be being overstimulated at night. Overstimulated by poor food selection, like processed carbohydrates, too big of a meal at night. It could be by watching too stimulating of news or show or whatever it might be. But for a lot of people, it's honestly the house is too brightly lit. Now, think in mind, again, I know that we live in, the 2022, and I'm sure you might be listening to this in 2030. Same thing, right? We've got all the conveniences of modern life, and it's great. Don't get me wrong. But the problem is you really want to dim the lights as the sun's dimming in an ideal world, or you're using amber lights, which is getting rid of the blue light. And the reason is that the sun is a different spectrum of ultraviolet rays. And UVB, or I should say just blue light, is one of those. There's red, there's a different spectrum. If you want to look this up, you're welcome to. I've done a show on this as well. But what we have to understand is that blue light at night is detrimental because that's actually keeping cortisol on. And so if you're keeping cortisol on, you're going to feel like what? Oh, you're going to feel like you got that second wind. You're going to feel like, oh, you've got plenty of energy at night. One, you have less to think about at night a lot of the time. Right? So you're like, oh, I've got all this free time now. I've got all this energy. Finally, all the stresses of the day are done. The kids are asleep, work's done, whatever it might be. And so you're up now and you'll want to watch TV. And again, if you don't get to bed by 9:30, 10 p.m., you very well may have a second wind. And I want to explain that right now. So the lowest peak in cortisol in healthy, balanced individuals is right around 9:30 p.m. at night. Now, it will change seasonally based on when the sun sets, right? In the wintertime, it might be 8:30. And in the summertime, it might be closer maybe to 10. So what I want to share with you is you can still go to bed at the same time every single month and day, but it will vary based on the sun in the sky. I mean, that again, we are part of nature as much as we like to think that we've kind of overcome nature. Well, we have not, right? Our human bodies are one with nature. So that means cortisol's lowest point of production is at 9:30 p.m., but it drops precipitously throughout the day, especially after like 1 or 2 p.m. So like if you're not bouncing around with energy at 5 p.m., it's not a bad thing. That's actually how the human body was designed, so that you can go to bed a few hours later. And it really is the ideal time to go to bed by 10 p.m., somewhere between, let's say, like 8:30 and 10 p.m. at night. Now, I know most people aren't going to go to bed at 8:30 p.m., but some people do because they like to be up by 4:30 a.m. I've done a show on the ideal time to rise. That's probably a little too early for most people. Your thyroid is actually just starting to turn on right around that 3, 4 a.m. time. Cortisol wouldn't typically turn on quite then because the sun won't rise for a couple hours after that. But again, I'm not going to tell people how to live their life. If you're going to bed at 8:30 and waking up at 4:30, then you're probably doing great. So I don't have an issue with that. But there's one more hormone that we haven't talked about quite yet, and it's the inverse of cortisol. So here's the interesting thing. If cortisol is elevated at night by blue light, too many lights on in the house, staring at your computer screen if you don't put on night mode, or your phone, or being stimulated by TV, news, etc., here's what happens. Melatonin won't be produced, or will be produced to a much lesser amount. So if you're stimulating cortisol at night, the fight or flight hormone, the stress hormone, again, it's not a bad thing, but it's meant to be used during the day, not at night, then that means melatonin won't increase. Why? Well, that's predicated by what? The hypothalamus and pituitary gland as well. The pineal gland is one of the signals for receiving those into the body, light essentially. But what happens is melatonin cannot override necessarily cortisol. Now, it can help to a degree. I will say that because if you're using something like sleep help support by Equilife or the liquid melatonin, those actually can. That's the interesting thing. But you put it into your body. Your brain didn't make it. So in the beginning, as I was trying to reset my sleep cycle, I actually did that. I used the sleep help, whole sleep help protocol for about 8 weeks to just get my body back into rhythm. But another way to do that is literally to say, okay, I'm going to go to bed at the same time every night, wake up at the same time every day. I'm going to turn the lights down, start to dim them, or put on amber-based lights past like 8 p.m. at night. No more screen time, or I'm going to wear blue blocker glasses. You can absolutely wear blue blocking glasses. Just can't take them off till you close your eyes, right? A lot of people take them off when they're getting ready, and then they have all the bright lights in the bathroom. You can't do that, right? But you can do either or. And I've shared it with people now for like 7 or 8 years that we know this to be the truth, because if you were to put people out in the middle of the woods camping for a couple weeks at a time, the sun's going to rise at 5 or 6 a.m. in the summer. You're going to be waking up whether you like it or not. And then it's going to get dark at what? Well, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock at night. So if you had no light, you were just literally living in nature. Believe me, you're not going to sit around for too long in the pitch black. So you're going to be to bed by 9, 10 o'clock at night. And then what time are you going to wake up? Well, when your body's rested, about 8 hours or so later. So you're going to wake up around what? 6 o'clock when the sun is rising. So this is how the human body was meant to work. If you can tap into this natural rhythm and work with blue light in the morning and then decrease blue light at night, you're going to produce healthy amounts of cortisol in the morning and then healthy amounts of melatonin at night. And then what happens is melatonin will keep being produced, but again, it will start to drop throughout the night as well, as long as it's able to get normal thyroid function around 3 or 4 a.m. And then as the sun starts to rise and cortisol begins to ramp up, as cortisol ramps up, what does it do? It actually then begins to shut down melatonin. So you want these two hormones working in perfect synergy. If you feel like they are not working right now and you need more energy, you need better sleep, what I would do is I would either run the sleep and stress test, or I would run the stress, mood, and metabolism, which goes in depth on all your hormones, thyroid, vitamin D, and so much more. So that's always my first choice, is the stress, mood, and metabolism. You can find that at stephencabral.com/labs, or again, you can always run it with your local naturopathic doctor or integrative health practitioner level 2. Hopefully this was helpful, and just let me know if the model was helpful, if the diagrams were helpful, all of that. I'm happy to do more of it in the future. Take care, everyone. Have an amazing day. I'll talk with you tomorrow. Did you know that the body really only becomes sick or imbalanced in only 2 ways? Over time, you become deficient in vital nutrients, and you also accumulate toxins internally and from the environment. As those nutrients diminish and you increase your total toxic load, your body then begins to show the first signs of dis-ease. It's actually quite predictable, and the good news is that if we know how you began to fill up that proverbial rain barrel, we also know how to empty it to begin the healing process. I was fortunate enough to learn this ancient healing process from my mentor after suffering from debilitating diseases for close to a decade. It was only when I began to implement these techniques did I finally overcome my illnesses and go on to live a life of energy and vitality that I now enjoy. I'd like to share with you now what I discovered after traveling all over the world and how to combine the best of ancient healing wisdom with state-of-the-art science. Allow me to teach you exactly how I've been able to help over 250,000 people to empty their rain barrel and begin to transform their body and lives into what they've always hoped they could be. To get your copy of the international bestseller, The Rain Barrel Effect, simply go to stephencabral.com/rainbarrel.